Great. Good afternoon. And thank you again for being joining us for special women's wellness talks. And we have the pleasure of having another guest speaker with us. Her name is Sarah Booth, and she is going to be working with us a little bit with yin yoga and things that can help women when they're going through maybe stressful times. If you're a mom and you're having a lot of things happening all at one time, or just life in general can be a lot in our culture. She's going to share some techniques, strategies to kind of help women out when they're going through difficult times. And also for people that are cancer survivors, these different things she's going to share will be helpful with the survival part. So, without any further hesitation, ado, I want to introduce Sarah Booth. Thank you for being here. Oh, also, I just wanted to say about Sarah, she is a licensed professional counselor. She's a certified yoga instructor, and she's also a licensed addictions counselor as well.
Great. Thank you, Natalie. I appreciate it. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me here today. I wanted to talk with you guys a little bit about, wow, the train's going by. Pause while the train goes by. Yeah, the car alarms. That's fantastic.
And it set it up a car alarm. Okay.
Oh, sweet. No worries. And then go ahead and resume. Okay, so like Natalie said, my name is Sarah Booth. I am a licensed professional counselor, a licensed addictions counselor, and a certified yoga instructor. I work locally here in the community. I've done yoga in the addictions forum as well as with like kids from preschool to elementary age. And the yoga that I've actually really become super passionate about is yin yoga. And so I wanted to talk a little bit today about how to utilize yin yoga in like our everyday practices, as well as in with our mental health, which is why I'm actually so passionate about yin yoga versus the traditional yoga that you'll do in like a yoga studio at the gym and what have you. And so I wanted to introduce the concept of yin yoga. Are you ladies familiar with the practice of yin? Okay. So it sounds like some folks are, some folks not quite so much. This is a very different practice from the actual, what we refer to as yang yoga. So if we think about the idea of like yin and yang, is that the yin is going to focus more on the dark, whereas the yang, so the active practice of yoga, will be much more the practice of the light aspects of this. And again, part of the fascination that I have with yin yoga is the idea of the meditative practice that comes along with yin versus the practice that you get with the yang version of yoga. So yin is going to be more cold, meaning that you're not going to be moving quickly through any of the poses. And that with most yin practices, you actually don't get up off your mat at all, which I know like super surprised me when I started doing the yin practice that I was like, what the what? Like, why? This is not yoga. This is like stationary poses. And we stay in these poses for a long, long, long time, which oftentimes that can be from 1 minute to approximately 5 minutes. And it is amazing how that 1 minute lasts forever. So yin again is like a very a passive practice, so that again you're not going to be going through the active asana that you will with a regular yoga practice. That you're going to settle into a pose and you're going to stay in that pose again from 1 minute to approximately 5 minutes, depending on how long you want your practice to last. Um, The other aspect, again, coming from like a straight mental health type perspective, oftentimes when I'm working with clients is that I'm working with an imbalance of energy that is going on for the client. And this will come from, anxiety, depression, from trauma. There's lots of different reasons as to why we will find ourselves in balance within our own bodies. But like ultimately, we want to find ourselves back in balance from a mental health perspective, but also from a physical perspective. So there is a researcher within mental health. His name is Bessel van der Kolk. He wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And the idea around this is that he acknowledges that like we actually hold on to our traumas and our experiences within our muscle memory. And by utilizing the practice of yin yoga as well as like the yang version of yoga, because you do want to have an equal portion of both within your world, is that it actually is a means of releasing your trauma experiences within the body. And again, why yin is so brilliant is because it forces you to get into your headspace when you don't want to. So it's also going to help us when we evaluate this, like we oftentimes come from a space where even from a societal perspective, we have people that encourage us to, well, just be happy, just stay in the light side of your world. Whereas again, the yin practice actually takes us to those dark and twisty places. And that's also what I do in mental health is that we go to those really dark and uncomfortable places and we learn to sit in those uncomfortable emotions. And that's what you do in your yin practice. Yet it can also be very awakening in that sense because it allows, with a lot of fighting, mind you, is that we are going to fight against going to those dark and twisty places the exact same way that folks do that within the therapeutic relationship as well. So we also want to honor the energy that we have within our system. We want to honor our bodies. And so we want to really listen to what's happening for us. And yin also provides that opportunity. Because when you think about this, is that how many times have you guys been in like an asana practice that is very active? So this would be looking like the, and I can't think of the word at the moment, but you're in a much more active practice. And that oftentimes, like, it's hard to listen to our body because there's somebody who's super bendy over here, there's somebody that's doing a headstand over here, and we're feeling obligated to compete. Ideally, that's not happening within the yin yoga practice, is that we're actually focusing on more of the calming nature and going into those poses and going into them, but then coming back out of them if there's any level of discomfort that we're experiencing. Because when we're practicing a more active yang version of yoga, is that our muscles and the tissue within our body is going to be more elastic. And so I brought my friendly thinking putty. If you guys are familiar with this, it's one of my all-time favorites. And because I want to kind of give like an indication of like what some of this looks like. So when we're thinking about the way that we're working our tissue within our body in that yang practice, is that it's going to be much more elastic. And that we're going to be focusing more on the extending and the stretching of those muscles. Whereas within a yin practice, I want you to imagine like if you have like a plastic bottle, like a plastic water bottle. I didn't bring one because I don't generally drink from plastic water bottles. But that with the yin practice is that we're going to be focusing more on molding the tissue with the yin practice. And as a result of that, we are going to be like stretching and stressing the tissue within the body as a result. So rather than doing more of the lengthening, we're going to put pressure on our joints. We're going to put pressure on the muscle. But again, you want to be really mindful of any sensations that you're experiencing when you're in some of these poses. Because again, we want to be finding the balance in our practice, not the imbalance. We don't want to be, walking away from a yoga practice feeling injured because we're going too deep into a pose. And then again, we want to like focus on that mental health aspect of that. How many times in our lives do we go too far into our practice, whether that's stress, whether that's anxiety, whether that's like overbooking ourselves, which I am the queen of. but that we want to be really mindful again of like what that looks like, because that's going to take a toll and that's going to find some imbalance within our bodies. And so when I do my yoga practice, I will be very mindful of what emotions come up when I'm in different poses, where in my body I'm feeling that experience, because it's also going to help inform what is the cause of what is happening within my body. So again, we're going to be focusing on stressing the muscles, but not too much to the point that you're causing distress or that you're elongating. You want to just have an in and an out as you're coming into your pose, as that you're starting to find your balance. Okay. So the idea of yoga, when I teach yoga to kids in school, is that we talk about yoga being the union of two things, and that we refer to that as the union of the mind and the body, and that we do that through our breath process. And that what we're ultimately doing, in fact, I had a yoga instructor one time tell me that the introduction of yoga was because they were teaching a bunch of younger kids, like think of like the Dalai Lama when he originally like became the Dalai Lama. He was a really young kid. And these little young kids go to these monasteries to learn to become monks. But how many of you guys have young kids? They are crazy town. They are crazy town. They want to run around. They want to be silly. They want to be funny, as did these little kids that were becoming monks. And so they actually introduced the practice of yoga to work some of that energy out so that they could then focus on their studies, which is the same idea of what we're going to do to be able to focus on our meditative practice to get into that headspace. And so again, like this is going to be like, as we're thinking about this meditative practice, we again want to go back to trauma within the body. Now, when I talk about trauma though, is that there's the idea of like little t trauma and then like big T trauma. But like recognizing that like what's going to be trauma for me isn't going to be trauma for anybody else in this room, and vice versa. And so we want to be really respectful, because again, when I work with clients, they'll come into the office and they'll be like, I didn't have any trauma. I don't know what you're talking about. And then they, as you're getting their like psychosocial history to understand what's going on in their world, they list off some like really crazy things where they witnessed domestic violence, their parents were drug abusers, you know, their parent died at an early age. But from their perspective, they're like, that's no big deal. And so we have to then like reframe what this looks like within our brain, and also the way that our body holds on to those stressors within our world, because that's where we again want to find that sense of balance. Because when we're sitting in a space of like dis-ease within our body, that's where disease grows. And that there's a researcher out of Canada, Toronto, Canada, Gabor Mate. He does a lot of research in the addictions population. And he postulates the idea that we either externalize our traumas through like substance abuse and addictive behaviors. So like process addictions, like shopping, eating, pornography, sex addictions, substance use types of addictions. And that but there are those of us in the population that do not externalize it, and we internalize it. And again, that's where like autoimmune disorders come from. That's where like some of the disease aspects come from. And that if we can learn to manage our stress and our anxieties and our trauma in our day-to-day life, we actually live to be happier, healthier humans. So again, when we're talking about like yoga being the union of the mind and the body, we're going to make that connection through our breath. But in like a yang practice of yoga, so a much more active practice of yoga, we utilize the ujjayi breath of like the very deep inhales. In a yin practice, we're going to go much quieter, much slower, and it's not going to be that focus, because we don't want to create the ocean in our breath with the yin practice. So the way also our autonomic nervous system works is that like, because it's automatic, we don't have a ton of control over how it shakes down. But the way that we can actually control it is through our breath. And with our breath, then you want to take a relatively short inhale. I like to do it on a count of maybe like 2 or 3, and then have your exhale be longer than your inhale, because you're tricking your brain that like oh, hey, things are cool. We're calm right now. Whereas, like, when you're on the treadmill, what are you doing with your breathing? Just kidding. I can't even do that because it causes me to choke. But we want to tell our brain that we're being chased by saber-toothed tigers. We want our brain to be like, oh my goodness, you're on the treadmill. You got to run as fast as you possibly can. So we're going to inhale as much as we can to bring that oxygen in, because the oxygen is going to send blood to our extremities to run like crazy so that we can be safe. However, though, when you're having an anxiety attack or a panic attack, we don't want our brain to think we have to run away from saber-toothed tigers, because your brain believes that there are saber-toothed tigers cruising around the art studio, but that's not going down. So we actually have to trick our brain that everything is cool. And so the best way to do that is to do the opposite of what you would be doing if you were running from a saber-toothed tiger. So let's practice that. We're going to do like an inhale that lasts for 3 seconds, and then we're going to try and extend our exhale for like 5, 6 seconds, as long as it can last. So I notice everybody's like sitting up straight. Awesome. We want to keep our shoulders out of our ears. So to ensure that that's not happening, we're going to roll our shoulders up and then down the back, and then up and then down the back. And so be mindful. I'd also like you to put your hand on your belly and don't look at anybody else, because we all know we don't want to show anyone else our belly. So we can close our eyes, or you can also look down at the ground, whatever feels the most comfortable for you. And we're going to do our inhale for the 3 seconds, and then the exhale for the 6. Inhale for the 3, and then exhale for 6. Inhale for 3, exhale for 6. So I have you put your hand on your belly, because oftentimes, and I especially see this with like these super cute kids in the preschool classes, that when they inhale, they up their shoulders into their ears, which is why we wanted to roll them back down to create that awareness of that we want to be doing our belly breathing into our belly versus our shoulders or into the upper part of our lungs. So in the yin yoga practice, again, we want to push into what we refer to as our edges, is that we want to take it to the edge of what feels comfortable to us, but we don't want to go past what that feels like. And so you may actually get up to your edge and then realize, whoa, this is not happening today, so I'm going to back out of it. And then again, like, we don't want to look at the other folks within the yoga practice, because that's their yoga practice. That's their body. And even when I first started when I did my yoga teacher certification, I actually would have insane anxiety attacks, even just like teaching the classes or participating in classes, because I would look at everybody else and I was like, man, like that person can do a really amazing headstand and I can't even pull that off. And so because I was then sitting there judging myself against everyone else within the yoga class, I still can't do a headstand. I don't have the upper body strength for it. It's just not in my practice. And I've had to learn to accept that, like, this is just what my yoga practice looks like. And if you show up to one of my yoga classes, we are not going to do headstands. If you want to pull that off in your own space, I totally encourage that, which is also the reason why I started teaching kids, is because when you think about this, like, kids also come from a very non-judgmental stance. They are super happy that we just show up for them. And so again, like, being really mindful of that, like, these might be some of the things that show up in your yin practice, but up here. And so we want to really be able to acknowledge that those are the thoughts that are coming through, and just kind of like, and then send it on its way. Also within the yin practice, because you're in those poses for so long, you can also keep a journal next to you and kind of journal between the poses some of the thoughts and the emotions that come up for you as you're practicing yoga, to kind of evaluate that further. So again, listen to your body and be respectful of what your body is telling you. We are all beautiful women and we're all made very differently. And it's important that we recognize and love those differences within ourselves. Because again, if we are not comfortable in our own skin, we are in that sense of dis-ease. And we don't want to give any opportunity for that disease to grow within our bodies. So pain, again, is like a one-way ticket out of a pose. If you're feeling any kind of an electrical shock, if you're feeling more of a stretch or a burning or a stabbing sensation, exit out. Again, it doesn't matter what anybody next to you is doing. If that's not in your practice for the day, don't do it. So again, within yin yoga practices, we'll hold the poses, generally speaking, for about 3 to 5 minutes. Today, just for the sake of time, we're going to stay only in some of the poses for just a minute because we'll have the opportunity to get on the ground if you guys feel comfortable, or you can also stay in your chairs because we want to learn to find stillness within the body. For instance, when was the last time that you felt you could just sit? You don't have a phone, you don't have your computer, there aren't kids around, your spouse isn't calling you, you don't have kick-ass. Well, art is actually a brilliant way to quiet the mind. We just don't do this. Like, we don't quiet ourselves, particularly in modern day society. And so we want to really be mindful of that this is our space, this is our practice, and our opportunity to take some time for ourselves. So when we start a yoga practice, as well as that, we want to have an intention that we're going to focus on when we start out. And so I would encourage you ladies to kind of think today about what is it that your heart needs to hear. And that's going to be very different for each one of us. But I want you to focus on what is that intention that we want to have for our practice. Maybe we're having struggles within relationships. Maybe we're having trouble within our work environment. Maybe we're struggling with like our children or all kinds of things within our world. Is that like, put that intention out into the world and kind of see what comes back to you in that moment when we're in some of these poses. When I'm doing this, like in the addictions arena, one of the things that we encourage people to focus on is that we're working with them on understanding what their triggers to use are. And again, like while we think about this oftentimes purely from substance abuse, there are a lot of process addictions that we go through. Again, shopping addictions, eating, even like our phones, our computers, work, other people we become addicted to, which shows up in the form of codependency. And so recognizing that with folks is that we will talk with them about what are your triggers, we want to do like a relapse prevention type of a plan. And so again, maybe there are some things of the way that we show up in the world that we want to create some mindfulness around. And so you can focus your intention in the practice on with that intention. So again, as we get started in this, is that like I encourage you guys not to judge yourselves, because man, the entire world could like judge us all day long, but that's not what this intention is about. Is that focus on the ways that maybe like we judge ourselves, that we show up in the world, but your practice is not going to be good, it's not going to be bad, it's going to be what it is. Just like we are not good, we are not bad, but we are great, wonderful humans at the core. And maybe some of the behaviors that we have are not quite so awesome. And so like focusing on how are we whole humans on the inside, and then how does that relate to our yoga practice? Do you ladies have any questions about yin yoga at all? Okay, do you guys, yes, please.
When I think of yin yoga, I think of like restorative yoga. Is that about the same thing, or is that not?
So it's actually not going to be the same thing, because like a restorative yoga practice is going to be going through some of the poses slower, but like with restorative yoga, that oftentimes you'll still come up off the mat, you'll still come into down dog sometimes. And like again, with yin yoga, we just stay on the floor. And and you're going to also stay in those poses for longer. Whereas within like a restorative practice, you're still going to be like moving through those poses at a faster pace, because we will literally sit in the pose for that like 3 to 5 minute type time frame. Yeah.
Sarah, I had a question. So sometimes it's hard to get on the ground for different reasons.
Absolutely.
So, what are some things you can do maybe sitting, like when you're at a doctor's office or you're waiting for whatever it is, and you might be feeling anxious or nervous? Because sometimes with all this stuff, especially some of the people that are survivors, you still have to go to all these appointments and
Absolutely. Which you totally can break out yoga in the waiting room if you want. However, we also know that that's not going to, well, it is actually nowadays becoming more socially acceptable. However, though, on your palm of your hand, you got your little fleshy part right here. And so, in a very nondescript kind of fashion, if you pinch that as hard as you can, it actually helps with some calming sensations, which our acupuncture friend can probably speak to way better than I can. But again, that it's because you're hitting an acupressure point here, as I recall. So, and you can like do that on either side. And my understanding, at least, is that the more frequently you do this, the more you're like connecting those like neural pathways within the brain. Um, Another practice that I'm actually ridiculously super in love with is called tapping. It's referred to as the emotional freedom technique. When it was first presented to me, it seemed like ridiculously hokey, except that it is so stupid effective. So I'll show you how it works because it also plays in a similar fashion with when we do trauma work with like EMDR, for instance, is that we want to identify like a negative thought that we have about ourselves. So, like when a traumatic event occurs, like for instance, let's say that we've had a car accident. In the car accident, we're going to be like, oh man, I'm such a horrible driver. Well, we don't want to run around believing that we're a horrible driver. And so, what is the positive thought that we want to have about ourselves? And so, we would utilize that to then like tap it out. So, we might say, even though I got into a car accident, I'm still a good driver. Because we want to believe that we are good drivers, that we're competent on the road, and that lots of things can occur that would cause a car accident. So, as we tap it out, we're going to say, we're going to go through our mantra. You can do this out loud or you can do it in your head. Is it like, even though I got into a car accident, I'm still a good driver. Even though I got into a car accident, I'm still a good driver. Even though I got into a car accident, I'm still a good driver. Even though I got into an accident, I'm still a good driver. Even though I got into an accident, I'm still a good driver. Even though I got into an accident, I'm still a good driver. Even though I got into an accident, I'm still a good driver. Even though I got into an accident, I'm still a good driver. Even though I got into an accident, I'm still a good driver. So you can actually go through this, and ideally what we do is that we're going to identify like the subjective units of distress, meaning how distressing do you feel when you start your tapping versus how do you feel when you end your tapping, which again is a similar thing that we do when we go through the EMDR process, the eye movement desensitization reprocessing, is that we're going to check the subjective units of distress at the beginning of each one of the eye movements as you're moving your eyes back and forth with that reprocessing. You're going to do the same thing with that tapping process as well. So a lot of folks that, for instance, have experienced like traumatic brain injuries are not able to do EMDR because of the eye movements that come along with that. But if you're in the doctor's office, instead of doing the tapping, because that might be just as bad as doing yoga in the waiting room, you can actually visualize the tapping as you go through that mantra. And it can actually help you in the same fashion. Because again, you're focusing on that negative belief that you have about yourself, but we then want to turn around and think about the positive belief or that positive cognition that we want to have about ourselves in those moments. Any other questions? Sorry, I'm doing like very much so like an interweave around the mental health aspect because these are all things that I'm like ridiculously passionate about because it's amazing to see such small things make huge differences in people's lives. It's really super fabulous. Minus the microphone. Okay, so if anybody does not feel comfortable getting on the ground, you can also do these like as like modified poses just in your chair. So okay. So first off, I'm going to show you really quick, like, even though I'm in this like little miniature chair, I can still, if again, like it's in your practice, I can still create a butterfly pose in my chair. And so again, like these chairs here look like they've got some kind of like wide space on there. So again, like if you want to stay in your chair and you don't want to get on the ground, you're certainly welcome to. You just want to make sure that you've got enough space. Also, a lot of the information that I got, like when I did my yin yoga teacher training, we studied this book by Bernie Clark. It's the Complete Guide to Yin Yoga. So a lot of the stuff that I was talking about in regards to like finding some of that balance, you will actually find a lot of these resources here in this book. The other thing that I really love about this book as well is that it actually has some yin asana in here, some practices that you can go through, and then also break it down by the amount of time that you're going to do each one of the poses. So today we're going to do like a beginner's flow, and I intentionally, I want to do this without any noise. I want us to kind of just like tap into some of the ambient noise that's here in the room and really get into some of that headspace. And again, if you're feeling any of those big emotions coming up, kind of like back out of it, acknowledge the thought, acknowledge the feeling, and then send it on its way with that longer breath when you manage your exhale. So again, if you feel comfortable, come onto the ground. Wait, we'll just do a phone. So again, we want to kind of start out our practice thinking of an intention that we want to focus on. Again, I know for myself, I am the queen of overbooking myself and having way too much stuff on my plate because it happens to also be the space at which I function at. But I want that to be the focus of my yoga practice today, is that how I can take better care of myself when I'm functioning in my day. So each one of you can close your eyes, you can like focus your gaze on the floor. From like a trauma-informed perspective, lots of folks are not going to feel comfortable about closing their eyes, which is completely legit. So you do what feels the most comfortable and safe for yourself and your practice. I want you to kind of like focus on whatever intention it is that you have today of where you would like your practice to go. Let's start to focus on the breath. Again, rolling the shoulders up into the ears so that we're mindful of whether we're breathing into our shoulders. You can have your hand on your belly. But focus that breath again so that you're doing a 3-count inhale and a 4 to 6 count exhale. We're going to start out with our first pose. We're going to come into butterfly position. So we're going to bring the soles of our feet together. You can bring them in as close as you feel comfortable, or you can also keep them out as far as feels comfortable. Because again, this is where we're going to be starting to find the balance within our body. And we're going to go ahead and we are going to stay in this position for 2 minutes. If you want to go deeper in the pose, you'll bring your feet closer to your sit bones. You can also lean forward. And focus on your breath. Remember, if any thoughts come into your head, don't criticize yourself, don't judge yourself, just acknowledge the thought, the feeling, or the emotion, and send it on its way. If you feel that you can go deeper into the pose, go ahead and do so. We're going to slowly come out of the pose. You can put your legs in front of you and kind of shake it out. And then we're going to straighten one of our legs. It can be either the left or the right. And then we're going to bring the other foot into our inner thigh. And we're just going to straddle the straight leg. Again, be really mindful because your hamstrings, they are not all created equal. And as well, on each side of your body, it's going to be very different. And so again, acknowledge that, like, you may be able to go down and like touch your tootsies over on this side, but on the other side, it may not be the case. So again, be really respectful with what your body is saying to you. We're going to slowly come out of this, and then we're going to straighten out that other leg, and we're going to straddle this other leg. Again, noting that what is good on one side of your body may not be awesome on the other. I know for myself, I hold all of my stress in my left hip socket, and I can feel it. So again, just be mindful that what you can do on one side, you may not do on the other. You'll also notice that I'm literally timing how long we're in the poses on each side of our body, because what you do in yoga on one side of your body, you want to find the balance and do it for the same amount of time on the other side of your body. We'll slowly come out of that side, and then we can windshield wiper our legs from side to side. Release the hip. Just notice how your body feels. And then we're going to extend out, coming down the center. Again, being really super mindful of how your body feels. You can put your hands on your legs, on the floor in front of you. but be mindful of what's coming up for you. This might feel comfortable, it may not feel comfortable. Remember to continue to do your breathing through each one of the poses. Let's slowly come out of this pose. You can shake the legs out or do the windshield wipers again, whatever feels the most comfortable for you. And we'll come back into our lotus position. And I'd like you to reflect back on the attention that you set at the beginning of class. And just kind of feel how this like sits within the body. Granted, we did not go through many poses. We didn't stay in the poses for very long, but this kind of gives you just like a little introduction to what the yin practice looks like. Again, we stayed in some of these poses for like 2 minutes to a minute and a half just for time purposes. But I do encourage you ladies to investigate further with the yin practice, whether it's at home in the comfort of your own space, or if you feel comfortable going into a yoga studio and checking that out. But thank you for your time and your practice with me today. Namaste. Do you ladies have any questions at all?
Do you teach a yin yoga class?
I don't at the moment, but I definitely should. I recently actually just changed positions. I've been working at an addictions and a domestic violence facility where I would occasionally cover the yoga class that's there. But I'm now working with a new company and looking into doing a yin practice there at that office space. So I can definitely let you ladies know when that gets up and going. So fabulous.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for being part of these talks. Thanks for all the people here. And thank you so much, Sarah.